I have a question for you. I like to begin with a question very often. So the question is this. Have you ever seen American Idol or American Got Talent? Anybody? Afraid so, he says. So any of those other talent shows, I'm sure you've probably seen some of them. And I'm not talking about seeing just the people who kind of made it to the top of the list perform and show off their talents, and that's all fun because they're very talented people. But I'm talking about a long line of people like who lines up and for days stand over there just waiting to showcase whatever it is that they can do better than everybody else to impress the judges to get on the show so that they could be later on featured. That's the people I'm talking about. Sometimes they're the most amusing ones. And so we've probably seen some of those, and some of those people get up on stage and grab the microphone, and they can't carry a tune in a bucket, but they get up on the stage anyway and embarrass themselves in front of the whole world. That's why these shows get watched. But in the end of it all, the people who actually make it to the final stages are some pretty amazing and talented people. Would you say so? Sometimes they get up on the stage and they look very unassuming, and all of a sudden this amazing voice comes out, or something that they can do that everybody looks at and say, how in the world did they do that? So talents and skills is something that I think we're very much fascinated and impressed by. Our weekly reading that we're reading this week is Tetzaveh, and it describes many details. We just read the passage. It's all about making special clothing for the priests and what is he supposed to wear. And so if you've been reading those descriptions, then for a 21st century person, these descriptions sound a little bit exotic. There are rare stones, there are precious metals involved, and all these robes are being made, and all these special garments for the priests. It's hard to connect sometimes with all that and say, what does this have to do with me? And in the midst of all these details, there's one particular instruction that stood out for me as I read the passage this week. And that's in Exodus 28, verse 3. So if you look at that verse and follow along with me, you will know that Almighty tells Moses to instruct those who are skilled, people who are talented, to make vestments for the priests. That's the job. Now, the verse describes Moses calling out to these craftsmen who possess special skills, and their job is to outfit the priest, our own first, and of course the others as well. So when I looked at the passage in Hebrew, this is very curious to me, the Torah calls these people chokmei lev, which could be translated as wise in heart, the wise of heart, okay? These people have a heart of wisdom. And as I look further, the Hebrew text describes these people this way. God says, Asher miletiv roach chokhmah, which usually gets translated along the lines of those whom I endowed with a special skill. But a more literal translation would be those whom I filled with the spirit of wisdom. Now, I realize that the variants that I just shared with you, my very, very literal translation brings out something completely different than what a lot of the Bibles that you read in translation would say. And the truth is, there's a lot of wiggle room in this translation because these are idiomatic terms that are being used in the Torah. So these people who are being called wise of heart are essentially very skilled in what they do. So the Torah uses the term chokhmah, wisdom, in the sense that it is an artistic skill. It's a special type of wisdom, if we think about it. It's a special variety of knowledge. It's a wisdom of how to do things. Isn't that what skill is? Wisdom of how things are supposed to get done. So, and that is why when we say wise of heart, it may be translated as skilled. It's a perfectly good translation. And to me, it just jumped out interesting how God describes those people who are going to make these vestments. Not every time that we put wisdom and skill together, but apparently in Hebrew it is. So there you go. So as I kept reading this, a looming thought that I was kept reflecting on is that most holy items that we read about right here are being crafted by very common average people, if you think about it. Skilled, but just people. The clothes that precious stones that were carved, the ephod, the breastplate, all these things we read about, the mitre, turban, however you wish to translate it into Hebrew, they're not made by the finger of God. They're not made by Moses. They're not crafted by Aaron. It's the craftsmen from the community of Israel who are called, and they're the ones who end up making these special items. These people have special abilities, I imagine, the talents that they have. They have some sort of a God-inspired know-how, perhaps, and maybe God has even given them imagination and creativity to come up with the very designs of what they're going to make. Because if we read them in the Torah, it gives us some ideas, but I think it leaves a lot for them to interpret artistically of how it's actually going to look like. So God may have even inspired them in some very special ways, but these people were from the congregation of Israel. They made the items that were most holy and absolutely amazing. And that leads me for some takeaways for you and I, for us today. First thought, you and I are the wise of heart in our day. We're ordinary people who have been endowed, sometimes with exceptional skills. You may not think of yourself that way, and you may doubt yourself. If I say this about you, you may be even unaware of the special skills you have. You know, most of the time, it's the other people who are around you who will tell you that you have some amazing skills. But we sometimes do not recognize our own. But in order to be noticed, you have to actually do things. You have to practice those skills. So it is quite possible that you have been endowed with what the Torah calls ruach chokhmah, a special know-how, a wisdom that others do not have. So my advice to you, look at it this way. You may not be asked to make garments for Aaron. You may not be asked to craft the Ark of the Covenant. But Hashem may be calling you to serve Him with the special skills that He has given deep inside of you in some other ways. It's not always about making the items for the priests. I don't know what those skills are. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I can see them, sometimes I can't. And I'm not going to be presumptive to tell people, oh, you have this gift or you have that gift. Sometimes I can see it, sometimes I don't. Hashem may call on you, is what I'm trying to say, to serve Him in some fashion, in some way, in some manner that may be similar to what these craftsmen did. They had a skill. They had a unique ability. So if Hashem is calling to you to use your heart of wisdom, your ability, your knowledge, your expertise, would you answer, is the question. Are you open to this? Will you answer His call? Thought number 2, the wisdom of the heart is that you were given is not necessarily tied to priesthood, but it is tied to God's glory. Think about it this way. You may not be asked or you may not be talented in this area of stand up and sing in front of everybody. Maybe this is not your task to stand up and give a drash or do a special prayer or chant from the Torah. That may not be your special skill. But you may think that this ability, this heart of wisdom, is somehow tied to something spiritual, somehow tied to a service. But it could be that your skill may not be directly connected to what you consider worship or even worshipful or ministry at all. But it doesn't mean that your skill is not useful to Hashem. Because sometimes we tend to see what's right in front of us and we tend to put special value in that. But that may not be the case. So I want you to think again, because ministry skills are not the only skills that Hashem requires. Think about this. As Aaron went to serve before the Lord, he was outfitted in the robes that he did not make. And I'm sure as he carried the censer with him into the holy place, and he burned that incense to create smoke to shield him from the very presence of God, pretty sure he didn't make that censer. And as he stood in front of the menorah and he filled it up with oil, I am pretty sure that not Moses or Aaron took those olives, beat them out, squeezed the olive oil out of them, pressed it, sifted it, put some special spices and aromas in it, mixed it together, get ready for the menorah. No. Aaron walked up to the menorah, refilled those lamps, and I'm sure those lamps were burning brightly, illuminating the whole temple in a glorious way. But he didn't make that oil. A lot of times we forget how many people stand behind people like Aaron and Moses and make things happen. But as we read these passages about the Mishkan, the tabernacle, we realize that there were some pretty amazing people out there who were, we don't even always know their names, but they were gifted. They had this ruach chokhmah, this wisdom, this amazing skill that they were able to practice and make the sanctuary actually work the way it worked. And it's no different today. The setting may be different, but the situation is very similar. So life is not a talent show, okay? And Hashem does not hold auditions. But I would say start using the wisdom of your heart. Whatever Hashem has endowed you with, your unique skills, start using them. And before long, your abilities will be recognized by others. And maybe you will be called as one of these craftsmen in the Torah were.